Good evening. Welcome to Financially Speaking. I am Dace Blaskovitz, a broker and senior vice president of Rutherford Brown in Catherwood, and I believe we bring another excellent program this evening. Busy show, 4 segments. We look at the financial markets through the eyes of the University of Delaware study. Third segment, we repeat with the Medical Society of Delaware. Second segment, we talk treasure. And my guest for the first segment is Sheldon Pollack. Do I have it right?
Sheldon Pollack.
Assistant Professor of Business Law, University of Delaware in the College of Business and Economics. Boy, that's a mouthful. Give us the highlights to Sheldon, real brief.
Well, Dace, I'm a professor for the last 3 years in the business school at Delaware, and before that I was a practicing attorney in Philadelphia, and before that I was a political scientist at the University of Pennsylvania. During the 1980s I practiced tax law and started writing a book on a problem that a lot of people face, which is why is the tax laws of the United States so complicated, and why do they change so often? That's a problem for tax attorneys as well as taxpayers.
Now we're going to put a visual up of the book, but again, tell us about the book. If we had to do the highlights on the book, what would it be?
Well, the book is, as I said, about why the tax code is so complicated. It's a tax code that's written by the U.S. policymakers that are in Congress, and these are people who have to run for re-election, and they use the tax code in effect to curry favors with main interests in their districts, and it's a useful tool for politicians who are in fact catering to interests in their groups. It's also used by the political parties, as we've seen in this election. A major tool of the political parties is to use the tax code to implement their economic policies, and so we've seen wide swings in our tax policy as the different political parties take control of Congress and take control of the White House.
But does that explain why it's so complicated?
Well, it's so complicated because we do so much with the tax code. When policymakers, give special benefits to groups, there's lots of provisions targeted at major economic groups. Not all business. Some are business, some are groups like labor. Laborers have many provisions in the tax code favoring tax-exempt insurance, health insurance, ESOPs for companies. All these tax benefits were put in by Democrats who controlled the Senate Finance Committee and the Ways and Means Committee. Republicans do the same thing and put in complicated provisions for their groups. At the same time, we try to reform through the tax code. 1986 was a major tax bill that attempted to reform the abuses of the tax code. Some of those tax shelters that people got tired of were cut down and shut down by some very complicated provisions of the tax code. In fact, some of those are the most complicated provisions.
But let me put you on the spot. Enough of this about the book. To a bottom line, in your opinion, you've put 5 years of your life into research and publishing a book. Is the U.S. tax code broken or wrong?
Well, it's not broken in the sense that it's going to raise about $750 billion. That's a lot of money. 55% of the revenue of the federal government comes from the income tax. And it's hard to say that's broken. I think what's broken is the side caps on expenditures. We have no restraint on our entitlement programs. The income tax is pretty good at raising revenue, but it does distort the economy. It does misallocate our resources, and we would be better off with some other system.
Few people have put the time into it as you do, and your life has really been dedicated to this subject. Bottom line, if you had a magic wand, that's a big if, but if you did, what would the tax code look like?
Well, if we could wake up tomorrow and have a different system, I would, in fact, support a consumption tax. And whether it's a flat consumption tax like was proposed by Steve Forbes or a progressive that taxes the wealthy at higher rates, we'd still be better off with a consumption tax. It has less distortions and less disincentives, fewer disincentives for savings. One of the reasons we have such low savings and investment rate is the income tax penalizes savings. Consumption taxes do the opposite. They encourage. The main problem, though, Dace, is that we just can't move from one system to the other overnight. And the political process can't handle that kind of a change, and it would probably be too disruptive for the economy as well.
I'm almost out of time. I've got 2 things for you. The first one is, again, what kind of proposals? Let me preface it by saying we're taping before the elections. But given that, going forward, briefly, what kind of proposals do you think we'll see?
Well, we're not going to see anything radical. None of those radical proposals for flat taxes and consumption taxes have much chance, and neither Dole nor Clinton supporting those. If the Republicans do control Congress, the 105th Congress, we will see some proposals for value-added taxes, national sales taxes. If the Democrats are in control and Clinton is in the White House, we're clearly going to see more tax policy making like we've seen for the last 30 years. which is just more special provisions added and more complicated provisions.
Real brief. We put the phone number on the screen. Hopefully somebody's interested in purchasing the book. Failure of U.S. Tax Policy. Briefly, tell us about the book.
Well, the book's a complicated book. It has no easy, simple recommendations. It's not a simple book or political book. It's an academic study of how we got into such a complicated tax system and how the tax system serves so many different interests. It's precisely because it's so complicated that I don't think we're going to see any kind of radical proposals.
All righty. Sheldon, stay with me just a minute. We're going to go to break. When we come back from break, we're going to talk treasure. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Financially Speaking. With me is not Lynn Dwyer. So obviously, that was an encore performance, but instead, Brian Hatt.